All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. I really appreciate Steve inviting me to speak on this. I'm going to start with some of the basic stuff that might just be very obvious, or maybe you already know, but just in case, we're going to cover some of the beginnings and what exactly extension is and why it might be important going forward. So this is me. Before I got this job as an extension educator, I worked primarily with ecotoxicology, and a lot of my work was done with honeybees and establishing some of the guidelines surrounding honeybee testing. So I'm pretty well versed in like your basic tox bioassay. But when I got this job, I had this question about what extension might be because I applied to a position that I didn't actually even know what I was getting myself into. So I did some reading on it, and it still was a little bit confusing to me, but um, maybe I like the idea of thinking of it like expanding out the classroom, where when extension first kind of was conceived, the idea was that you had universities and colleges that were producing research and producing all this good information, but you had farmers, and this was specifically, it started out for farmers that didn't really have access to that and maybe wanted access to this higher level of information, or maybe just didn't have the schooling to understand what was going on in universities. So the concept is basically just science communication, like getting that information out to these farmers, in addition to also providing research that is applicable and actionable by these farmers. So specifically to target farmers and the needs that they might have. And it kind of started with this Morrill Act in 1862, which established land grant universities, where they set aside federal lands just to create colleges that would benefit agricultural and mechanical arts. And then this kind of evolved into the Smith-Lever Act, which established cooperative extension, which is a partnership between universities and the USDA. This is UMass Amherst, which is one of the land grant universities established. So one of the general structures of extension is that you have these tiers that kind of filter down. And at the state kind of level, you've got these land grant universities like UMass Extension. And then at the local level over here on the right, you've got your regional and county extension offices like Cooperative Barnstable, Cooperative Extension, Plymouth County Cooperative Extension. And I don't think that this diagram is perfect, but you can see that at the different levels, they're interacting with different groups of people in general. Now, I don't think it's like clear, like black and white. But I would say in general, what I spend most of my time working with are local groups, not necessarily at the state level. Extension today is a little bit different than I believe it was kind of the intention when it was conceived. You still have ag, which is really important, but it's not just for farmers, it's for all groups of people in all walks of life. You've got schools, you've got maybe scouts, maybe casual hikers, and it's expanded beyond just the concept of assisting with agriculture. Like we have on the right, one of my colleagues, Kathy Akimpor, she's teaching dog bite safety for a 4-H group and and also schools. So I mean, that's not really ag, but it is also really helpful. And then on the left, I have, that's myself, and I'm assisting this one woman over here. She had some issues with ticks in an area. She wanted to know what to do. So she wanted me to sweep her property. I mean, I'm gonna find ticks if I sweep, but it's she wanted it anyways, and I kind of guided her through that process as this one-on-one conversation, which is not, she wasn't really involved in ag. She was part of a land trust, but still really helpful. It's still something that I think people really want in terms of evidence-based information, right? The outreach today is a little bit different. We still work directly with the public, but we also have all these other streams of information that we're kind of pushing outward as well. I think from YouTube down to local newspapers or maybe public radio. And as Steve was mentioning, like I think that at least with county extension, one of the benefits is having this connection with, boots on the ground, connection with people and organizations that are local, and being able to really tailor your message to those specific groups. This is just an example of some organizations that I work with. But the one in the center, the American Heritage Girls, was an interesting one because that consists. It's like Girl Scouts, but it's different. It consists of a lot of homeschooled children with a high emphasis on religion. And in a lot of cases, these children aren't necessarily taught evolution or the science the way that we might expect them to be taught. So in general messaging, it wouldn't necessarily they wouldn't necessarily understand or be able to accept some general messaging around science, but you might be able to tailor if your goal is specifically tick bite prevention or mosquito bite prevention, you might have to tailor that message around these specific groups that you're interacting with. Same thing with like maybe people of different generations, or maybe people who are with a mind for conservation, or maybe people who care a lot about bees, or maybe, people who do a lot of hunting. The message is going to be different depending on the group, and which I'm sure you know, right? The question I get a lot, and this comes from not necessarily the academics, but it comes from a lot from the general public and even just like people within government, is what about the internet? And I like to think of the internet. I'm not sure about this man here, Tim Ferriss. I don't know a lot about his character, but I did like this quote from him. And he referred to, in reference to the internet, the disease of our times is that we live on the surface. We're like the Platte River, a mile wide and an inch deep. And I like thinking of the internet that way, where we have access to so much information, but that depth of information is lacking. This is a chart that's been adapted from Messel, 2009. And what you can see is that maybe the role of extension, I don't think this chart is particularly 100% accurate. I mean, you look at the timeline and you go from like 3400 BCE and up to 1930, right? But the general concept is that the availability of information when cooperative extension kind of came about in the early 1900s was much lower than human working memory. So that was kind of the issue, is that people needed access to information. But what we're dealing with now is not necessarily access to information, but science literacy and the ability to understand that information. And there's a lot of good information that already exists out there on the internet, but there's also a lot of bad information too that exists that people in general just have a lot of difficulty telling apart. This photo on the left, you would not believe how many calls I got about this particular photo. It consumed a very large amount of time last year when this kind of spread like wildfire around the internet. What is good about extension, which is different from, let's say, a YouTuber or maybe a radio, a media outlet, is that people think of extension as this unbiased source. And right now in today's world, there's this general distrust of organizations, of either big pharma or big ag. They talk a lot about it. People in general distrust, mosquito control, or even just like the government. And even though extension is funded through the government, people do very often see me as this unbiased source with no stock and no stake in whatever happens with anything else. And so they do like that, and they do appreciate that. And I think that might be the strongest advantage of having a county extension program. So what does extension work look like on a daily basis? What are some of the things that I do? Presentations and tables, they're a pretty large part of it, and you can see them at like health fairs, giving lectures in museums. But I think adding the human component is something that really can't be ignored, and I think is really important, other than just distributing flyers and giving presentations. What we kind of notice is that people, and I feel like I learned this a lot during 2020 when a lot of the shift was towards Zooms, and I felt like I wasn't getting the same reach, maybe more reach, but less. I was affecting people on a much not as deep of a level. Because what we're finding, and this was a needs assessment that was put out by the state of Massachusetts, and they found that all people relied on family and friends and word of mouth when it came to getting information about Lyme disease. So some use the internet, some use TV and print media, but all of them relied on family and friends and word of mouth. So again, this human component seems to be really important. It's really hard to put a number or assign a value to it, but I think it's significant. So one of the things I try to do in my daily work is try to be everyone's friendly neighbor, right? So I try to really get out there. If people don't need anything, then I just try to show my face, try to let people know that I'm there so that they have someone that they can recognize and get out there and ask me questions, that they can feel comfortable approaching me. And I'm either not going to judge them and I'm going to try to talk down to their level or try to understand and empathize with their situation. These are some examples of just emails that I get on a regular basis. Like this top one is a pest control company in Marshfield, and they're a company that I would recommend. They use Telstar and they spray properly. They're always asking me questions, but they're getting more and more requests for natural products, and they just wanted to know my thoughts. And they wanted to know about any new literature that's come down the pipeline about natural products that might advise them on either what to tell their clients or what direction they might want to go in. And then the one in the center, again, is about yard sprays, but they're in an over 55 community. They wanted to spray cedar oil. They wanted a number of different products, and they wanted advice on this. And then the bottom one, same thing. They wanted to know about tick tubes or peppermint oil spray or cedar granules on the lawn. And then the one on the bottom is a woman who came from Wareham, and she saw the picture of these. They're springtails, but she thought they were ticks, and so she wanted to know about this new bug that she thought were ticks that were crawling around her yard. And so again, having this human component as someone that people can just reach out to and just they're comfortable with, they're not going to be intimidated by. I think that again is a really important component. Some of the ways that I like to get out in the public are hosting annual shoe sprays. Like some of this involves like going out directly and spraying people's shoes. But it could involve like going to a health fair and setting up a shoe spray event there as well. Outdoor, outreach, leading walks as maybe this butterfly walk, but with the intent to teach people about tick and mosquito bite safety. I found has been very successful in getting a different groups of people to come out as opposed to just like saying, oh, we're going to talk about ticks today in a classroom. No, we're going to go outside and we're going to look at dragonflies. We're going to look at bugs. We're going to look at all these different kinds of critters, have a nature walk. And by the way, like this is important information you should know about ticks and mosquitoes. Media creation has been a fun component, just kind of teaching people about kind of some myths about ticks. And for whatever reason, people still think that rubber boots will protect them against ticks, but I like this video. I show it a lot. It's kind of a funny thing. I think it gets a lot of a laughs. And local access TV. I mean, if you're this is going to reach a specific demographic of people who watch local access TV, but it does reach people that might not be using the internet. I found it reaches a lot of people that don't necessarily like using the internet, and so I kind of felt like the aliens meme guy when, when people show me this picture. But um, I like any avenue that I can interact with different groups of people. I try to take just to try to round myself, smooth at the edges, right? So is this all working? I certainly hope so. But the truth really comes down to is I don't really know. I like to believe that I'm making a difference, but I think it's really hard to assess whether or not it's just interesting or fun or if it's actually changing behavior. Um, so I do like to collect kind of statistics on what I do year to year. And last year, I gave 108 programs. They weren't all related to ticks or public health. Some of these, again, were like butterfly walks or, talks about pollinators. But I do like to record where I go and if there are any towns or, places in the county that I've kind of neglected, like Halifax, I gave 0 programs to Abington. So I'm making a concerted effort this year to go back. I do track attendance for these groups as well. And what I've been finding is that, the ticks and the pollinators are pretty popular. The general entomology, that's popular because it's just one of those things people want to learn about fun stuff rather than for whatever reason, ticks and pollinators. But focusing on ticks and pollinators, people seem to really, really like that. Um, age demographics. This has changed a lot since I first started. I would say initially when I started, the seniors and adults made up almost the entire pie chart. And now I've again made a concerted effort to loop in teenagers and children. The teenagers are especially challenging to go and talk to. But that 10% is about 10 times the percentage of what I was when I started. So I'm going to pat myself on the back for that one. And I'm going to try to make that even bigger in the years going forward. But the children has gone up. The children's been a lot easier. It's just really been a matter of I mean, that's why I came up with the butterfly walks and the dragonfly walks is to loop kids into teaching about ticks and mosquitoes, and because it's difficult otherwise, they're not going to come to just a tick presentation, or their parents aren't going to bring them to something that they think might scare them. We did conduct a survey in 2021 with this Master's of Public Health student, Mu Jin, and what she found based on the survey was that the attendance of the educational programs was associated with participant knowledge. So more people that attended my programs scored higher on this survey in terms of correct answers than people who hadn't attended. Now, I'm not really sure. I mean, I like to think that it's because of what I've taught them, but it's also, I think, entirely possible that maybe people coming to my programs already have a high baseline of knowledge before attending. So it was again, it's kind of hard to know if it's working, but this is something that I do like to think that it's working. I hope that what I'm doing is making a difference and that it's not necessarily people coming that already know a lot about ticks, that it's coming people who are coming and they're absorbing that information. And it's a little bit of a shorter presentation maybe than other weeks, but I'd be happy to take any questions about any of the information that I kind of went over, or if people want to know something a little bit more in depth than what I spoke on.
Thank you, Blake, for the presentation. It was great. So we'll open up the floor to anyone with questions. Lars, you can unmute and proceed.
Hey Blake, thanks for that presentation. I'm Lars Eisen. I'm a technical advisor from CDC. I really enjoyed hearing your presentation about extension and outreach and the role extension outreach can play. And I'm really glad you're working with Steve and the COE and all this. I really appreciated your point about the Platte River, because I have exactly the same feeling that information out there is a mile wide and an inch deep. And I can't wrap my head around how how on earth young people are going to grow up and be able to figure out what information is useful and what is just total crap. And I think it's such a major, I think it's a major obstacle to science in general going forward. So I really appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with what you're saying, and it is challenging. I am an optimist. I like to think of the glass half full, so I do hope that, and I do see, at least in my experience, kids. It's kind of funny because kids are more skeptical, but at the same time, they're skeptical of even good stuff, even real stuff now too. So I don't know. It's a different world that they're living in, and I like to have hope that they're going to be able to discern things. We just might need to adapt our messaging to kind of assist them with that. But I don't know. I guess I don't have a good answer, but I have a lot of hope.
Andrew's next. You can unmute and proceed, Andrew.
Thanks, Blake. It's really great to get a better sense of how extension's working, and it seems like there's a lot of variability between offices and all of that. I'm curious to figure out how you've been interfacing with the schools or the boards of education in the towns, and do you approach them directly and say, I want to do a program, or do people reach out to you, or has it? I'm just curious how that process has worked.
Yeah. There isn't. I wish I could tell you that there was a recipe for this. It hasn't been that way in my experience, and with COVID, it really kind of hurt me a lot. so back in 2017 is where when I started. I was kind of on this like things were like ramping up and I was getting into schools and things were great. And then COVID hit and all of that just momentum stopped. And since then, so I would say since 2021 or 2020, late 2021 and 2022, some of those connections kind of remained and things are snowballing again forward. So I'm getting a lot. But what I notice seems to happen the most and what is the most important to cracking into schools is that again that friendly neighbor aspect where it's if you make friends with the teachers there, they'll have you back year after year and they'll tell their friends. And it's just this weird thing that again there's no formula. It's just talking to like I started with things that were people that I could relate to. So I started with the environmental clubs, I started with the science clubs, I started with those groups and found connections with those groups and they just invited me over and over and then they told their friends and they told their friends and so it's hard to just pitch an idea to them. You almost they're going to help out a friend, they're not going to help out or at least in my experience they're going to help out their friends. And so just kind of making yourself friendly and available, I felt that at least for me that was the best strategy to getting into the school systems.
Okay, so having outreach to specific people and individuals within a school are then making it happen. Yeah, that's kind of what I
Yes. Yeah,
anticipate.
it's not
Okay.
it's less like reaching out to the top to the principal or something and having that be part of the curriculum.
Yeah.
It's like reaching out
And
to the teachers and they build that up. It's kind of backwards, but
yeah. Okay, that's very helpful. Thanks.
Mhm.
Tom, you're up next.
Hey, Blake, thanks for your presentation. This is Tom Mather. Building on what Lars was mentioning as well, I think that I'm starting to get a real sense of the importance of the extension capacity because it's someone that has time to keep going back and reminding people of what they need to learn. And I just think that we need more Blakes out there in the world that can do this. You know, I would like to do this, but I just don't have the time to do what's really necessary. I see it in my own teaching with university students that I can give them a lecture about ticks and they're supposed to need to want to know it and everything, but some of the things that I think are really important are knowing the types of ticks where you live, and the reason that you need to know that is because they transmit different germs, and so the risk for disease is different. And what I have taken to doing after I teach them how they can see the differences between the types of ticks, then I shoot them an email for the next 2 weeks, every other day, of pictures that I get from tick spotters and challenge them. And it's amazing that after not just one or two times, but maybe 4 or 5 times, then they start to get it. And if you don't have someone like you out there doing that continually until it sort of imprints on them, it's a little like how we establish habits, right? You don't just do it the first time. Usually you do it after many times. And so how do we have the opportunity to do that in tick prevention? We need people like you in the community that can do that. So I think that we should all be advocating for more extension opportunities, I think, and people that that's their job, that they can spend the time doing that.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I really appreciate any of the kind words that people have said, but I that was one this was what that was one part of the presentation that um I wasn't really so funding a position like this was something that I wasn't super comfortable talking about because I still don't really understand how the funding works for for the county extension position, right? I know what I do know is that it comes from a number of different sources. Part of it's from UMass, part of it's from the county government. I don't know. My director would know, but getting that started in other counties, I think would be huge. I completely agree that it would be awesome if there were county agents. I would say in every county would be really, really nice, but I don't even know how you would get that started without county government. Um, I don't know.
I just remember years ago, I did something with the ESA where they partnered me with a younger person. I can't remember the girl's name now, but we went on a tour on Capitol Hill. And the point that I think she made to me in our first discussions, I tried to emphasize when we were meeting with staffers that she wanted to be, she was trained as a medical entomologist and she wanted to do extension, but there was no position. There really are few well-trained medical entomology extension positions across America. And, you know, it seems like a big gap. But so she wanted to do it, but there wasn't really any jobs to apply for instance. And there was, because there's no money to pay for those jobs. And yeah, so that how you start that, I think, I think there was a lot of lobbying at the local level in Plymouth County to try and drum up the money for your position. And that was, smart because the payback, I think, is, hopefully you're showing that you're earning your keep.
Yeah, I'm a bargain. They don't pay me that much, so I'm pretty cheap for what they get.
I agree also, and I'll give the floor to Steve in a second. With the schools, we've tried a lot to get things, and the one thing that we've had success with is what you mentioned, is getting in with individual teachers, and so taking advantage of that. So for instance, I got taught that pretty quickly. My wife was the principal of the local elementary school, and you know she doesn't have time to, she can, if she wanted to, she could point out somebody that might have time, but it turns out that mostly teachers have such a tightly scripted time that they don't have time for like a new program. So one of my classes a couple of years ago created something called Tick Trivia, and it was a class that was a lot of fun to do. My wife came to the students' presentation about it. She loved it. My graduate student Chantel did it at a ESA Eastern Branch meeting for people. They loved it. So when they see it, but they have to then carve out the time to do it. And so breaking it into doable things for the teachers, because they have so much that they have to do, that taking on one more thing, it's like any of us, we don't really look forward to taking on one new thing that we're not completely familiar with. So it has to be like rock solid, no brainer for them, that it's all the information is there if you want them to access it, or better yet, you just go and do it for them.
Yeah, totally. I try to roll in with like everything ready to roll, that they don't even have to think about it. It's just they know me and I just show up and I teach the kids and that's it.
Yeah.
They know what to expect. And that's why I think they have me back year after year, is because it's so simple. They just schedule a day and they don't have to do anything else.
Yeah.
So I would just echo everything that Tom says, just praising the work that you do, Blake. It's really great. And your counterpart in Barnstable County, Larry Dapsis, who's now retired, did a great job there. And one of the great benefits to what you guys do is, first of all, you build trust in the communities, right? So you have a very high level of trust of the people in your communities, but also you liaise with groups like Tom's and Kirby's, and like when something comes down the pike, you trace it down to validate that information, and that's what makes it trusted. But to the point about funding of this, I think one of the things so you're a unicorn for two reasons. One is you're a rare extension educator at a county level in the state of Massachusetts. The other is you're an entomologist. So there's two things that have been dwindling over the decades. One is extension and the other is entomology, the presence of entomology. And I think they're tied to that financial thing that most of extension and entomology was tied to production agriculture, which has gone down in the state and all of the states in New England. And so you had need for pollinator research, et cetera, and to support the crops and production agriculture in the state. And then medical entomology was sort of an add-on to that. But as that's gone away, so too the little add-on of medical entomology has become smaller and smaller. And so to build it back up, it's basically to communicate the message that that extension model has worked so well in agriculture that it should be extended to other places like public health. And even I've even argued, like, here on our campus, we're not an agrarian society anymore. We're a service industry. And so extension could be providing support in computer science and lots of other fields. So the model worked for the better part of a century. And then when the country changed, they didn't change the model. It sort of it stuck with this notion that extension is agriculture, but it's a great working model. It's a great local model that could be extended. And I'm hoping that that's one of the things that the center can do, is to reinforce that kind of community of practice approach.
Totally agree. Couldn't agree more. I think that you said everything.
Any other questions from anybody? All right, so I'll take silence as a no. Blake, thank you again. And on a side note, I do have the ticks ready for you, so I'm going to be shipping those out
Awesome.
at some point. But I'll email you separately.
Hey, make a plug there. So Blake's going to be doing a training thing on Cape Cod with Gabby. Do you want to talk about that, Blake?
Sure. It's every year Barnstable County Mosquito Control runs their mosquito ID workshop, and I think pretty much anyone can go to it, but it's mostly targeted at the mosquito control districts and extension, people in extension. They wanted to know a little bit more about the ticks in the area because their mosquito control folks are constantly finding ticks. So I took it as an opportunity to just teach them about, some of the more common biting ticks, but if they're also going to be, identifying ticks, like maybe as an opportunity to maybe collect some data on maybe some ticks that might be a little less common, things that we might be looking for the distribution of, things that I've been trying to flag for and find the presence of for the past 7 or 8 years. It's possible that if, they can either recognize that it's one of the common ones or recognize that it's not, and then send that off to either Steve or whoever wants to collect the ticks or conduct that work on figuring out what they are. I mean, so that's the goal, is just to teach them about like kind of the basic ticks, Ixodiscapularis, Dermacenter and Amblyoma are probably going to ones that I'm going to focus on. And then if anything doesn't look like that, then send it to someone else. But that's kind of the goal. It's not going to be fully in depth in the same way that the NEVBD ran their vector-borne disease boot camp. It's going to be a light version of that.
Make sure you include male Lone Star ticks, because they don't look like what people think they are.
Yes.
And another thing that might be fun for you to point out that we get asked a lot. So nymph ticks in particular don't quite look like the adult stages. Most people, so what I've learned with tick spotters is that people don't really get the concept of life stage. And so we would call them as an adult female, but I've now learned to insert the word stage, because they don't get, if you ask them what stage a tick is, they really don't know. So mostly, I think if they see an unfed tick, they often will call it a larva or a nymph, so they don't get it if it's an unfed adult tick. They just figure a real adult tick is one of those big puppy things that you take off of your dog. And so just trying to get at that. And if the people say, well, why are you teaching me that? Because the risk is different depending on the stage of the tick as well.
Right. Yeah, I definitely had that in mind, which is why I wanted to just focus on, the three more common ticks that we find in our area, just because, and I mean that's already a lot of different appearances between all the different ticks, male and
Exactly.
female, nymph, and I wasn't going to talk too much about the larva for dermacenter because I feel like I never even really encountered larval dermacenter, but definitely larva for exodes and um, amblyoma for sure. And then again, trying to keep it more condensed and not talk about some of the other stuff. But we'll see how much time I get allotted and how big this grows.
Yeah.
I have a
When
Yeah,
it,
question.
thanks for the tips.
I have
when
a
you
question
really
for Blake
get
or
when you
Blake or
really
Tom.
get down to it, somebody could give you some partially fed amblyoma nymphs, because if you turn them over, they always have white guanine in their rectum. And you don't know how many times people say, well, why did my Lone Star tick have a white spot on its belly?
Yeah.
Because they expected it to be on the other side.
For Tom or Blake or anybody else on the call, how do you guys handle the colloquialism of seed ticks? When people ask you about seed ticks, do you understand those to be larvae or unfed ticks or?
It's different depending on who you ask. And I think in general, most people just are just referring to a small tick
Yeah.
and not necessarily related to life stage, but it generally means an immature tick, an immature unfed tick. But it could even just be like I've seen people refer to a very small male deer tick as a seed tick too, which is like not correct. It's just kind of it's definitely an opportunity to teach people about life stage. I kind of look at it like that.
Yeah.
Other than that, there is no real definition, at least in my experience that I found.
Thank you.
All righty. So I think we'll wrap up. Blake, thank you again for presenting today. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate everything. It was a
Thanks.
lot of fun.
Take care.